back to the Mix Academy. I'm David Glenn, a pro mixer and audio mentor, and I'm here to help you take the good, the bad, and the ugly of home recordings and turn them into hit records. Today, I'm going to share how I start a mix. I'm going to got a little checklist for you. I'm going to break down my process, what I'm thinking, how to best serve the song at the very beginning to set you up for success, and we're going to dive into that. But first, if you haven't already, I've got a GoFundMe. Recently, I've hit some hard times, got some medical stuff going on, and I started a GoFundMe at the advice of some of my students looking out for me, and it's been extremely helpful. Would really greatly appreciate it. I'm not just asking for donations, I'm actually providing something in return. I've locked myself in the studio, recorded an entire course, mixing the same song you heard at the intro. So if you like that, you want to see how I mixed it, I'm providing the full set of multi-tracks. You're going to be able to download it, mix it for yourself, and use it on your resume. I know a lot of sites you can download them and mix them, but you can't really use them. You're going to be able to do more than just practice with these. You can actually promote your services. And then I've got the full set of tutorials showing you how I mix the drums, the bass, the keys, the guitars, everything is in there. And I'm also throwing in the exact mix template. Everything that I have for that song and that session typically runs $100-$150 on my website, but this one, donate $1. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to honor my word. $5, $50, whatever you can. It would greatly appreciate it. I would greatly appreciate it. It would help tremendously. And with that, let's get into today's tutorial. So we're going to kick it off. Got my list here. We're going to look at stereo Monolizer. That's the very first thing that I do after I receive the files, download them, put them in a folder, all that, stuff. That's, typical. But stereo Monolizer does two things for me. Number one, it converts true stereo files to mono. It's common if you are familiar with people working out of Logic. You go to export. There is a setting in Logic and multiple DAWs that will allow you to export mono multi-tracks, but you got to go into the settings and tick that box. And most people I work with, they just don't. It's very rare that I get files from someone who works in Logic and they've converted them to mono. What that means is you got an acoustic guitar, a vocal, and it's coming to you stereo. That's double the hard drive space. That's double the processing power for a lot of plugins, and it's just unnecessary. So stereo Monolizer will look for those non-true stereo files and convert them to mono, so that makes your life a little bit easier. CPU processing and things like that. Again, you can go through and do that and listen for that in the mix. If you don't want to buy an app, you can come over and just kind of click through the tracks. Is it stereo? Is it not? Right click. In Pro Tools, you just go split mono, delete the stereo file and one of the left or the right. But it's a process, right? This track has only got 47 sets of multi-tracks here, but often that's a third of what I normally receive. So definitely saves time if you're doing this professionally or you value your time. Check out Stereo Monolizer. The second reason I use this is for gain staging. I used to pull all my tracks in, group them, and then drop all the faders. Just wherever the client, the band had the gain staging, I would just drop the faders to -20, -25, and then I'd build the mix like a house. I'd pop the kick up and the snare and the bass and the vocal and just kind of one by one start to build the rough mix. And that's fine, it works. But what I found is that I prefer to use clip gain before I even touch the faders, because what happens is in most DAWs, your faders, when you get to the automation phase, they're going to work best up here around that 0 or detemp position. Whereas if you have them down here, let's say your keyboards were really hot or your bass was really hot and you had the fader way down here to keep it in balance. Well, now you go to ride the fader for automation, or if you're over here on the other side and you click the fader out here and you go to write automation, if you're way down here with the fader, then you're not going to get the same movement from response, I should say, the same response from the audio as you're moving the fader here as if you would if you were just moving it slight, half dB increments up here. So you may find you're going to have to boost a dB or 2 or 3 or 5 to get the same result that you would. So that's one reason why I do it. Write a lot of automation in my mixes, and so that has been the way that I like to work. The other reason is you've got stereo synth files. Actually, here's an example. This song here, if we come out to the stereo, the lead synth here is going to be much louder, I'm willing to bet, than anything else. If I touch the gain staging, I don't think so. So if I hit play here, this stereo lead synth is going to be much louder than our kick, our snare, and that kind of stuff. Check it out. So in this case, we come out here, where's that lead synth at? I'd have to drop this down. I still can't hear the kick or the snare or any of that. So, and they're all the way up at 0. Well, the snare wasn't, but the kick, still can't hear that. So what I found is that doubled guitar, synth tracks, keys, all that kind of stuff. They've got that that extra energy going on, and I find that I need to take that mono kick drum and boost it, way more than what a fader is going to allow me to do. So now you got two options. You can throw on a plugin and boost the input in the plugin, or most DAWs have clip gain. And so I'm going to go ahead and let me boost these so you can see. So we come over here, and how I would start a mix, I typically take the kick, the snare, the shells of the kit, the floor tom, all of that, and I just boost it until I... So somewhere up there. I know it looks like a lot, but again, remember, I'm coming over here with stereo Monolizer. My normalization is minus 18 dB full scale. And so that's a lot of headroom. But again, that frees me up to be able to come in here and get a better balance, because now if we go out to that lead synth, I may still need to pull that down with clip gain, but let's put that back at 0. My kick and snare are in the ballpark, at least, of being balanced with the track I didn't touch versus those that I did boost. And so what I find is that transient-driven instruments, your kick, your snare, your toms, clap, shakers, some of that stuff, you're going to need to pull up quite a bit, but then doubled guitars and some of those things you won't have to touch. So stereo Monolizer gives me the headroom for me to be able to do that the way that I like to do it, using clip gain. That's probably more long-winded than you needed, but we're going to move on. The next step for me, obviously, is going to import those tracks and import the rough mix from the band or the artist. If the producer is giving me a rough mix, the band is giving me something, I'm going to import that in. I use Adapter Metric AB. Reference from Mastering the Mix, I think, is a company, has got a great tool. Lots of good plugins out there. Or instead of using something like this for your reference mixes, you could just drag it in and set it out to the right of the song that you're working on and just have it out there, and then maybe set you a marker for going back and forth to reference your tracks. But I did that for years. But great tools. We have this, and very important to level match your references and your rough mix. I'll import those in and get them ready. Before I build the rough mix, I often, my rough mix, I like to have the client's rough to know where did they pan things, because you pull up the drums, you get everything going, and then you have like a lead guitar. Well, did they have that lead guitar down the middle, just off to the right, hard left? They've been living with that track for however long. They've been listening to it and working with it. They've put it there for a reason. It may not be where you end up putting it, or you may experiment with other things, but it's a good idea to listen to the rough and reference it for where they've got things, and it'll help you whenever you deliver a mix. I don't know how many times I've done it where the rhythm guitar was on the left in their rough mix. I happen to put it on the right, and they hit me back and they say, hey, could you just throw that on the other side for us? So it'll save you some time. They've been listening to it, living with it for a little bit, and a little tip there. So references, the rough mix, that's a good way to build your rough mix, is to check those initial balances. So now it's time to get your initial balances. And like I said here, the way I do it is with clip gain, and I'll go through, I'll get the kick, the snare, and the toms up in the mix almost immediately. And again, we haven't touched EQ or compression yet. We'll get there. But in this video, we're going to focus on that and the panning position. So now we've got overhead hat. I know that's on the left side because I rock drummer's perspective. We're going to pull up these overheads a little bit until I hear them. Got a crash ride going on. Cool. And we got some room mics. We'll come back to those. Let's get the bass in. Alrighty. Mouse got away from me there. Let's get the bass in. Cool. And when I do that, I failed to do that in that case, but I'll hold Command and grab the little clip gain icon here. And when you do that, you can have smaller increments. You go in, little 0.1 dB increments. Whereas if you don't do that, you don't hold Command, it's going to fly out of your hand just like it did there for me. Let's come out. A good point is to find the high point of the song. I like to go to the chorus of the song. In this case, the song kind of rocks right away. So I'm going to find those guitars. We're just going to build that mix. Like a House. We got some other rhythms out here. What do we got? We'll solo these. Some heavy guitars. Cool. And then the keyboard shortcut, if you're in Pro Tools, is Control, Shift, and then the up and down arrows. If you're on Mac, if you're on PC, what would that be? Drawing a blank. I think it's going to be is it the Windows key, Shift, up and down? I don't know. I'm a Mac guy. So anyways, you can do it that way. We got those guitars in, and I'm just going to build the mix like a house from these initial tracks. So once we get that, if you want to see me build the rough mix and how that whole process goes in full, definitely check out the link in the description. Next up, what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate it. So let's say you've built your rough mix, you've panned things left and right, and you got something that's just, you're flowing with it, starting to be able to hear the song and not just raw tracks all down the middle in mono. The next step for me is to evaluate the arrangement. What's going on with the song? How is it arranged? Do we have way too many tracks? Do we have 2 or 3 doubles that we don't need? Do we double guitar 1 and it's the same on the left and the right, and then we have guitar 2 and it's the same on the left and the right? Maybe we ditch the right side of guitar 1 and the left side of guitar 2, and now we have a wider stereo image to be able to. So looking at the arrangement, is there anything that's messy? Maybe there's some holes or gaps that need to be filled. Maybe there's some production stuff that we need to look at. All the time I'm trying to evaluate as a producer, I'm thinking, how can I serve this song in the mix? And it needs some reverse sounds. It may need some reverse swells. It may need some crash cymbals. Maybe the cymbals weren't well recorded and we need to enhance the one or the energy of the first chorus. And so I'm thinking, how can we do that with production before we get into mixing and all of that? Another thing that we're going to look at is the drum sounds themselves. The more you do this, the more you're going to know right out of the gate what's the band's vision. If their vision is a modern, hi-fi, sample-driven type song, then you're going to hear that kick. Got a great kick recording right there. But I know that I've got samples that with a click of a button, I'm going to have something that's ready to go rather than fighting this with EQ and compression. I blend all the time, but those are things that I'm going to be thinking from the beginning. Another thing that we're going to talk about is editing. So I'm not going to break down. If you want to see a full editing video on drums, definitely drop me a comment. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. But it's one of the first things I'm thinking is when I'm listening to this, does the song as a whole need major editing? That's a problem. I'm sending it back to the band and saying, hey, you either need to edit this or hire my assistant to edit this for you. Here's the cost, blah, blah, blah. Again, we're trying to serve the song, and you can't get to the mix and push things up if it's not edited. If maybe you haven't been doing this very long, or you're just getting started with paid clients, you may eat that and you may go ahead and edit the drums and the bass and whatever for them. But it's certainly high on my radar is this ready for mixing? And we're going to hear that when we push up a good rough mix. So editing, drums, timing correction. And sometimes, let me say that. Sometimes it's not a full-on editing job that's needed. In that case, I'm not sending it back to them. I'm not being a jerk. If I hear like there's a fill that's a little rough, I'm going to fix it, right? It's our job to take this song to the finish line, treat it as if it's your baby, and I promise you those bands and artists are going to keep coming back to you for more, and they're going to be talking about you and spreading the word. So not a jerk about it, but it's definitely a huge deal is editing. Let's talk about bass editing. I add a lot of low end to my bass. I mix a lot of gospel, a lot of rock, and I love to just get the most out of the bass guitar. The kick drum and the bass really got to make sure that they're working well together. And so if you come over here, let's say that this bass, I don't know, let's listen to it. I got a great recording. It's one of my students. Helped them. They bought a really fancy DI. Got some really good stuff going on with the bass recording, compression and things like that. But let's say that I needed a whole buttload of bottom end, and I wanted to come in here and I'm boosting and got the Pultec or whatever, right? Well, what you'll find is that in between sections, you'll get these like rumblings or noise, and it can be very distracting to the song, to the performance. And so what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll kill all the dead space in between, and we'll do that to clean the bass up so that we don't get any of that stuff. Even in a spot like this, there can be times where we got to push 20 dB in the mid-range of the bass to help it cut. Maybe it's a picked bass and it's just not cutting the way that we need it to. Well, when you drive that much compression and EQ to pull a song out, you're going to have instances where it creates artifacts, and those artifacts can cause a distraction to the message of the song, and we want to get rid of those. And so little sections like that I may or may not deal with. Coming out here, really this song is not even the best example of it, but right here would be one. So as it's ringing out, I'm going to listen. At what point does that bass create a problem? And at that point, I'm going to cut it, go in here, create a nice little fade, and nice little fade into the next spot. So crucial, if you like a lot of blow in like I do, to go in and clean up some of those rumblings. Next thing is your kick and bass timing. So let's say you go and you edit the drums. Well, now you got to go and you got to look at the bass and how all those other instruments that were probably tracked to that untimed drum kit, unedited drum kit, and you got to maneuver those to slide them in time. They were following the drummer. Now the drummer's in time. They might be out of time. And so we got to go, and a cool way to kind of get through that quick is just to go to starts and stops of phrases, starts and stops of the performance, and tighten those up a little bit. It can be a great way to kind of fake the drum edit and just tighten it up a little bit. Time is money. You're doing this as a business. You want to make sure you're efficient with your time. On the other hand, I'm a huge stickler for kick and bass being super tight. You want to make sure that the bass doesn't hit before the kick drum. You want that initial attack from the kick to be the main thing that's heard. We use things like sidechain compression and all kinds of tricks to get the kick and bass working really well together when you put a lot of low in both of them. But another way to do it is just slide the bass just behind the initial transient of the kick. So I'm often, after I get the drums edited, I'll bring the bass, come up here by the kick, and we'll see here. I don't know, is this one? Yeah, so you got the bass is just behind, and I'll kind of go through, and in a Pro Tools I use Elastic Audio, and I just barely nudge the bass right behind that kick drum. At the very least, make sure they're on top of each other, and then if you use sidechain compression or something, you're ahead of the game. So kick bass, very important to make sure they're tight and that they're playing well together. Next up would be, same thing, your instruments, your keys, your guitars, all of that. You're often going to have starts of phrases that are off. If you take 15 minutes and go through and just improve little parts here and there, you're going to find it makes a massive difference. And it's one of the kind of the most obvious amateur mistakes is having a good mix even, but the timing is wrong. The vocal is not tuned. Leads me to my next point is vocal tuning. But amateur edits makes for an amateur mix. Unfortunately, no matter how great your drum sound or any of that, editing is massive. So with that, vocal tuning and timing, nothing screams amateur, I wrote here, like out of tune vocals or out of time vocals. And this was a song where you have a young singer, and I think they went in and they tracked this song, the album. They went and drilled him 2-3 times. They went back and retracked to make sure they got the best performance and the best timing out of him. Tuning anymore, obviously you got Melodyne, Auto-Tune, tons of tools, Slates, Metatune. We're spoiled with tools for editing pitch. It's so much more important to get the performance and the energy out of the instrument, out of the vocalist, than it is the tuning. Yes, tuning matters. Yes, go retrack it to make sure you nail the tuning. But anymore, the performance is what's going to affect the listener. It's what's going to get the message out there, and that's what I like to encourage people to focus on. So anyways, vocal timing, vocal tuning, huge for delivering the best mix that you can. If you don't already, man, go sharpen your skills with editing drums, timing the bass up against a kick, and then starts and stops of phrases, and then obviously the vocal. Those are some of my top tips for today's video. So I think we're going to continue on and maybe do another video maybe where we go into that rough mix. Maybe I show you kind of starting mixing the drums. If you guys would be interested in that, let me know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to check out the link for getting your hands on these exact multi-tracks, mixing it for yourself, using it on your resume or to practice, but you can share it. You can publish this to SoundCloud or whatever. We'll just have links in the course that'll tell you, give the band credit, point to them. That's all we ask. And all of that information down in the description. Hey, thanks for sticking with me. Appreciate you guys. Let me know in the comments if you want to see more, what topics, what things you'd like to see me cover, and I'll see you in the next one.